Go ahead and call to order the March 19th meeting of the West Bath School Board. Ask you please rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we enter into executive session pursuant to Title I, Chapter 13, Section 4056A of the MRSA for the purpose of discussing student records, and Title I, Chapter 13, Section 4056D of the MRSA for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations between the West Bath SAU and the WBA. A motion and a second. All in favor? We are going into executive session. Okay, we are back in regular session. Brings us to item 5, comments from the chair. We do have a lengthy agenda tonight, and I know everyone is very excited to get to the budget portion of the agenda. So we are going to limit public comment to the 2 spots that's listed in the agenda and after the budget presentation. We will not take public comment on each agenda item this evening. Item 6. Approve the minutes from the February 13th meeting.
Make a motion to accept the minutes from the February 13th meeting as written.
Second. Motion's been made and seconded. We'll give the tie to Dennis on that one. Any discussion? All in favor? That is approved. We do have 2 adjustments to the agenda this evening. We are going to strike item 11.2, review of policy JFABD, admission of homeless students. We're still waiting on some additional information on that. We are going to add an agenda item 12.2.1, and we'll call that budget actions in case we choose to take any action after the budget's been presented. Those are the only adjustments I am aware of. Brings us to section 8, public comment. Any member from the public wish to address the board on any issue?
Why, I would. I'd love to address.
Please go ahead and state your name
And
for the record.
Keep it nice and long because you people have nothing better to do. My name is Kimberly Gates. I'm the executive director at the Bath Area Food Bank, and you are?
Marilyn.
Okay. So I reached out to Mary a few weeks ago, and I just asked, is there any way, because I have a lot of free time, I would love to come and thank everybody on the school board. One of the things that's been happening, and I don't know if you're aware of it regularly, is your school has been doing food drives that have been the most successful food drives the Bath Area Food Bank's ever seen. I'd love to say that we see things like that all the time, but we don't. I've been working with Julie Upham. I've been working very closely with Julie Upham. I feel that Julie Upham is the driving force behind that. She doesn't only collect the items that I need, she brings her kids to the food bank. They spend an hour and a half over there. It's actually like herding cats. But they stock shelves, they ask questions, they wonder why there's a piece of chocolate somewhere, but they ask. And then they say things like, I want to work here when I grow up. I want to help feed hungry people, Mrs. Gates, when I grow up. And this hasn't been Julie's only class that she's brought over. Julie's brought over other classes, and those kids will still see me in Shaw's and ask me what I need or do I need any help. The beautiful thing is you do have a lot that are already clients that Julie brings over, and I know them. I don't make any reference to them, but they'll say, Mrs. Gates, I got the SpaghettiOs yesterday, or they'll see me out and they just feel okay. They don't feel needy. They feel like it's a place that they belong. And that's because West Bath promotes that. And West Bath is the driving force behind these food drives. And I just wanted to say thank you. So thank you very much for supporting that, for supporting Julie, for paying for the bus to get over there. It means a lot. So thank you. And that's it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Great feedback.
I'm going to see my family. I think they're at home. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I'm see Wednesday. Guess what? I'm the speaker.
Any other public comment at this point?
Museum on Wednesday too. So figure out how that's going to happen.
Seeing none? Brings us to item 9.1 Policy Committee. We do, as the second reading's going through,
Yep.
continuing to plug around the mandated
I
policy.
can add that we did not make any changes during the first.
There you go. 9.2, Technology Committee.
We do have an update.
Who will be delivering that?
Mr. Bowden.
Mr. Lewis.
We worked a little bit in the past month or so putting together a timetable of the life expectancy of the technology we have in the building. I believe that you all have a copy of it. Starting at top, we, with the Teachers Max, that cycle every 4 years, Chromebooks every 4 years. And you can see that we stage the Chromebooks, as most of you know, because you've been here through all the cycles of the budget. So this year's a non-Chromebook year. We also have a MacBook Pro, which is Superintendent Thompson's MacBook Pro sitting there. It also has a 4-year shelf life. Our iPads, we are still on the old RSU1 iPads. They have stopped getting updates about a year ago. So we're hoping to buy 5 more this year to replace those. We had 20, we don't use 20, so we're gonna cut it down to 5, which is a more tangible number that we actually use on a regular basis. We have also the projectors on there, cameras. I have a blurb on there about the phone systems. Do you guys have any questions about that, or it's pretty self-explanatory, I hope.
The goal was to allow us to better predict, a time frame out what our needs were going to be for the budgeting.
Good. Have any questions? Thank you. 9.3, Facilities Committee.
Okay, the Facilities Committee has continued hard at work. I sent you the minutes with the board packet, so you have had those ahead of time. We have been discussing things like the outdoor water fountain, the continued cabinets and flooring upgrades, looking at emergency generation, talking about the back parking lot. And then we also had a capital improvement plan put together around our heating system. And so we looked at all of those pieces to begin to think about, just like we did for technology, what do things look like over several years. First of all, decided that the water fountain really is not something we can talk about in relation to the budget because those will be coming from playground funds. We still have work to do around preparing for that, the process of installing the outdoor water fountain, but it doesn't need to be part of the budget conversation, and so we've tabled that work for now. We also made a list of actionable items with the mechanical assessment, and I did include the mechanical assessment in your board packet. So basically, it looks like this document. If you thumb through it, starting at page 4, the most urgent area is looking at our heating 3-way valves, which are in poor condition and need to be replaced as quickly as can be replaced. And that is something that actually, when we withdrew from our former district, Siemens had pointed out was an area of concern. So that came up as the most urgent area. Equally urgent was looking at heating supply pumps. And there are 2 of them. We asked about whether or not they could be, we could do one in 1 year and one in another year. And we're told it was really best that we have the same heating pumps, that we move forward with it with one project. The next item that they listed was the gym fan. This has been something that we've talked about for years. It's loud. Because it's loud, we don't use it to ventilate the building. The feeling when we looked at all the needs in the building was that, knowing that in 6, 7, and 8 years out we have roof maintenance, that this project can wait until we build it into a roof maintenance plan. Turning the page to page 6, there's a separate fin tube zone. And this is an issue in the office in the classroom next door. When the office was built, the controls for both spaces are in one room. And so one room is hot while the other is cold and vice versa for a very minimal cost. This is a project that would fix that issue and something that we would like to do out of this current year and not plan to move forward in the future, just take care of that now because it's about a $2,000 project. And then looking at midterm capital plans, our classroom heating and ventilating. In this wing of the building, we have unit ventilators which have gone past their life expectancy, and that has been an issue that has been ongoing. Looking at replacing these at 12 to 16,000 per unit, we created a plan of how to do that over a period of time. Then there's also the ventilation relief, which again, when we looked at this, it seemed like that would be something to plan out for further into the future when we're talking about roof maintenance, so that it would not be something that we could consider at this time. And then finally, the kitchen hood was another recommendation that they had. And to be very honest, we didn't talk about the kitchen hood as a priority. It's something that I'll have to come back to the table with the facilities committee with. I think my reason it didn't move to the top was that it would be something that we would look at a year that we have food service excess and think about how to fund part of that, but that's something we just didn't talk about. So we'll come back to what the recommended projects are in just a moment. Another item that we've talked about at length is looking at emergency generation, and that item comes up later in the agenda, and we'll go through that in detail at that time. But do know that the committee at this time chose to not recommend the full generator project, and did have a few items that they charged me to look into further, but we'll talk about that later in the agenda. So next in your packet, then you have the action items that did come out of the facilities committee. And one of the first recommendations that they made was that we had started along a path of looking at flooring and shelving upgrades. And we had a series of classrooms that were done this past year, and then we separated them out into phases of year 2 and year 3. And so the feeling was the committee would like to recommend that we continue with phase 2, now would be on this chart phase 1 next year, except for we moved the bathroom floors down to phase 2 because it's not as much of an issue as it had been in the past. We were able to do some deep cleaning and take care of some of the parts that were problematic, and so it wasn't the same level of importance as it had been looking at the items that were in phase 1. What we did add back in was the hallway. For the last year, as you know, we've had issues with heaving in the hallways here, at this corner here, and then down the 3-5 wing. And we looked at all different ways to be able to come up with a solution to take care of that. And finally, we think have come up with a solution with replacing with just the VCT that we have right now, but that using a product called Ardex to be able to have a contractor come in, clear out where the heaving and cracking is, put the Ardex in to level it off, and then to have the flooring happen. And so we broke that up into 3 phases also, where the pieces that are impacted by the cracking and heaving now would be in the phase 1 hallway part 1. Phase 2 is looking at the 3 to 5 wing, starting the boys' bathroom all the way down. And if you walk down that hall, you'll see where there are indentations in the floor. And then hallway part 3, less critical, is looking at this section here. So that's what that is there. So if we go back up to the proposed projects, the priorities identified by the facilities committee are taking care of that 3-way valve and the heating supply pumps, and looking at 1 unit ventilator with a plan of doing unit ventilation 1 each year until we can get through that project. Continuing with that phase 1 flooring and shelving. And then as we talked about at our last couple of meetings, we are not that far away from needing to do our roof replacements. Roof 1 needs to be replaced 6 years from now, and that's a $125,000 cost. Roof 2 is 7 years out at just under $100,000, and roof 3 is 8 years out at $50,000 for a total of $270,999. The facilities committee would recommend that we build $35,000 into our budget each year to begin to build towards that project, so that by the end of the 8 years that we have the funds to pay for it, rather than raising all of that at one time. The next column you can see is the deferred improvements. And so the first is the flooring and shelving. That's looking at the phase 2 and phase 3 that we still identify as concerns, but are not most immediate. the continued unit ventilators that should be replaced, they're past their life expectancy, but that if you're looking to build them, do it over a period of years, there's the cost there. The exhaust fan, really, I feel like should be waiting until we have a plan for redoing our roofing. Not on this list for deferred maintenance is looking at the ventilation too. So I'll add that in for you to see next time around. The generator of $50,000 that has been discussed at length, we would defer that. And then the rest of the roofing that's not that $35,000 that's in the proposed projects there. So you can see then that based on our conversations throughout our facilities committee's meeting, we're looking at proposed projects of $121,358.50 as our starting place for this budget.
Thank you. Any questions on what's here? Obviously, we'll have much more detailed conversations when we get into the budget. Any questions? It's nice to have data and numbers to look at. 9.4, Finance Committee, 9.4.1, payroll warrants were reviewed and signed on 2/15 and 3/6, and AP warrants I reviewed on 2/15 and 3/7, Dennis reviewed on 2/20 and 3/7. Brings us to item 10, Superintendent's Report.
First, I just want to start out with our financial report, that with 33% of the school year remaining, we have 50% of our budget remaining, and we are in good shape. That feels like a large amount of funds in terms of our budget when you think about where we are with only 4 months left, but remember that it's going to include the rest of our transportation contract, all of our tuition, all those large expenses that we won't get until June. So it's a little deceiving, but when you look at each individual budget line, there's no areas that I feel uncomfortable with at this time. And if you're okay with moving forward, we can move right along.
Please do, we're gonna talk lots of finances.
I wanted to let you know that on March 9th, I attended a half-day school funding and lean superintendent's conference. And it ended up being more than just school funding, even though that's how it was billed. And it was maybe one of the most valuable half-days that I've had in a year, because it was superintendents from all over the state and you had a variety of workshops that you could choose to select from to be able to support your current needs, and you had opportunity to just talk and network. So I had some opportunity to spend some time with administration from Brunswick, and we continue to talk about ways that we can potentially partner moving forward. But I also went to workshops on the certification changes and the SAU consolidated plan, which is something that we'll have to tackle soon, Ashley, as my consolidated plan member. It was a very productive morning. I wanted to just let you know that one of the most interesting things that came out of that is that, as you know, the purpose of the SMLC was to look at ways across the state to reduce administrative costs. And so that was the reason that SMLCs were to be formed. And so for this year, schools are required to have 61% of their school budget, their overall school budget, directed directly towards students, with the goal that in 2022-23 that 70% of your budget is applied directly to students. And that doesn't seem like, that seems like it makes sense where schools were here to educate kids, but they released a list of where districts are in their current fiscal year, and it was surprising the number of districts who are nowhere near that 60% target. But I was excited to see that West Bath is 18th in the state for efficiency in terms of expenses, and already have 76% of our budget applied directly to our students. So that is a great place to start from as we continue to try to do things better moving forward. So remaining funds that aren't in that area are student and staff support, which I actually would argue does support students because it's library, it's social work, it's technology, system administration, school administration, facilities, transportation, and food service, which I also would support, say that transportation and food service directly support kids, as do the facilities. But that's just to give you an idea of what they look at in relation to the budget. So that was great to see that we're in the top 10% of efficient districts in the state. We also looked at the changes to the preliminary 279s, and that is our funding formula for how it is determined how much state subsidy schools get. And as you know, we're minimum receivers, so most of the changes don't apply directly to us. But a few things just to note because it's interesting, that the DOE announced that the total cost of education was increased by $44 million this year from last year. But when it was asked how that was applied to districts across the state versus, as compared to how much went to minimum receivers and how much went to districts who were non-minimum receivers, they didn't have that information, and so that's something that districts are pursuing, to have that information at their fingertips. They also made changes from our, in terms of figuring out enrollment. It used to be that we did a student count October 1 and April 1, over 3 years, averaged those out, and that was the number of students that they said that you have in your district, an average of 3 years, counts twice a year. And so now it's going to be a 2-year average just in October. They've also changed the state valuation for fiscal capacity to be a 2-year average rather than a 3-year average. They've increased opportunities for pre-K funding and increased the weight of special education in the formula to 1.5%. So all those pieces don't necessarily apply to us, but good to know in terms of thinking about how the overall funding formula has changed. They did increase the minimum receiver special education adjustment from 33 to 40%, and that does apply to us. And you'll see that when we look at our state subsidy in our budget, how that has impacted our subsidy. And so on the preliminary 279, our state subsidy has increased. We'll receive $165,886.42 in subsidy. I did ask for a review of our 279 because there's no allocation for high-cost out-of-district placements, and I do believe we qualify, so they're doing a review of that right now. So our budget that we'll look at in a bit has our current 279 in it, and it may change, it may not, but we've asked for a review of. Right. Are there any questions about that? In terms of district updates, I want to publicly thank our community readers. On March 2nd, we had several of our readers who actually come on an annual basis here to read to our kids as part of Read Across America. So Sally Haggett, Karen Schneider, Martha Mayo, Marian Hargreaves, Barbara Gall, Lois Skillings, Joel Mary, Bill Browning, and Patrick Thomas came to read to our students. And we love having them in the building. We look forward to the event every year. Thank you to Mary Wallace for coordinating great volunteers for us this year. On March 9th, our Reactors Club, which is made up of 2nd and 3rd graders, performed the Lorax. It was directed by Jennifer Bodish, a parent, and Lori Franklin, one of our teachers. The costumes were put together by Nancy Riggs, another one of our parents, and the group was supported by 2 staff members, Susie Newton and Liz Detweiler. And I gave you a copy of their program. It was of such high quality. It was just a wonderful performance. Amazing what students can pull together and how much love and energy and went into this from the adults involved. I want to thank our parents and staff who made it happen. It really was fantastic. I want to also let you know, in regards to pre-K, that we have signed MOUs with our current partners again for next year, memorandums of understanding. So we'll continue to work with the Schoolhouse, GAF, YMCA, and Head Start. Applications have gone out for pre-K slots for next year, due in May. In our MOUs, there's not a written agreement for what the costs are. We paid the same flat rate for the last several years. You'll see there's a slight request for an increase in this year's cost, still looking at funding for 12 students. Also would like to let you know that the school choice grade slots for grades 6 through 12 have been designated to students. All those letters have gone out, and we are at about approximately 20% of our students electing school choice for next year. I have had a few requests since the window closed that I have denied because of the policy that we do have, and I'm grateful that we have a policy to go back to because being at 20%, we're pretty close to that level of being able to offer school choice. Also in your packet, you have the overview of what we outlined for our portfolio for EL credentialing. It's a 7-page document that gives a summary of what we'll be proposing to present to prove that we have met our EL benchmarks. So I sent this in on March 1st, and we received it back on Friday. That with just some minor adjustments, we are approved to continue the process. And so now we have until June 1st to build our portfolio and prepare our public presentation, which is very exciting. It's a little bit overwhelming to think about taking all that I've put in these 7 pages into a portfolio, but exciting to see it all continue to come together. Next, I want to just give you an update on emergency preparedness. Over the last few weeks, emergency preparedness has been on everyone's mind. I wanted to let you know where we are with the process. As you know, we've been focusing on increasing our security over the last several years in our building. We have locked doors at all times on the outside of the building. We have security cameras that monitor our doors so that we can see people coming and going and entering and exiting. Those cameras are on 24 hours a day and maintain video for 2 weeks?
Yeah, about 2.5 weeks.
For 2.5 weeks. We also now that we've continued our alarm system upgrade, which has been completed. Every time a door opens, we have a chime in the office that we hear that just allows us to look up at the cameras to make sure we see who's coming and going. We also moved to a fob system so that we can see when staff are entering the building and exiting the building when we're not in session. So that has been helpful already. Before we just unarmed the building and we had no idea who was coming and going. We are in the process of reviewing our emergency plan. We have reestablished an emergency plan committee and we'll be working with local law enforcement on making sure that our plan is the strongest that it can be. Simultaneously, we're also preparing to practice our safety drill, which is a lockdown drill. We were working with Saginaw Sheriff's Department to be able to do that. We were planning to have that this week, but snow days have delayed that process. We will communicate with parents before we have our drill so that parents are informed that's going to happen. So I wanted to let you know that there's a lot of work that's been done over the last several years and continuing to be done in the background so that we can do our best to ensure that our students are as safe as they can be while they're at school. On a related topic, last Wednesday was a National School Walkout Day that was initiated by students to be able to support the losses in Florida. We discussed as a faculty and what role we should have in it and what's appropriate for our students, and really felt that our children were too young to participate in such an event and that we weren't comfortable with promoting a side one way or another, but that we're always comfortable with is promoting the opportunity for our kids to be change makers. And so what we did instead, and we didn't necessarily connect it to events in Florida, but we took it as an opportunity to make commitments to kindness and compassion. And so you will see over the next several weeks, West Bath's 100 commitments to kindness and compassion, and it continues the work that we did in February around kindness and in the community, and we'll share our progress towards those goals over the next several months. But it was a different way for us to take the parts that we hold valuable in terms of promoting common good and taking care of one another with this situation. And then my last update is that you have in your packet the report that I submitted for the town report. It's always hard to write an annual report about the successes of your school when you're only 2/3 of the way through the year. However, I do like taking the time to stop and pause and realize that even though there's still 1/3 of our year left, we have lots to celebrate. One of the things that you'll notice in there on the back page are some of the comments that came from students in their interviews around what makes West Bath School a special place. It includes some of the comments from the 12th graders and 8th graders. The comments from the 8th graders in particular, which only a few are included, really were as powerful as we had hoped that they would be. The 12th graders are just starting to come in with some of their responses. So at some point I can share all of those with you. That was just a snapshot. In terms of upcoming events, tomorrow, Gelato Fiasco fundraiser. It's one of the best fundraisers of the year. Gets our community together and you get to eat gelato. Gelato Fiasco does donate 100% of the sales from the event to the school, and it's just an amazing fundraiser of $700 to $800, which generally the PTO has put towards supporting the third grade swimming program. I'm not sure that they've tailored it this year to that, but that's what's gone to in the past. You also should have received at home an invitation for the 5th grade boat shop open house. I put one in your packet in the event it hasn't come in the mail yet. But that is scheduled for March 29th, 11:30 to 12:30. I also want to just give you the exciting news that today marks the beginning of the main education assessment testing window. So for the next 4 weeks, we'll have the opportunity to test our students. We typically wait till the second week to start our assessments, let the kinks all fall out at the because it's an online testing program. Let that all work out at the state level, and then we'll take our turn. So I'll get schedules out to parents in the next couple of days so they know when their children will be testing. But I also just want to reiterate that we expect that our students try their best at their schoolwork at all times. And so with MEAs, it's no different. We don't spend much time, if at all, doing any test prep. It's just what they bring to the table that day. And I think that our scores have been really quite phenomenal, especially given the fact that it's just measures a typical day for a kid is a good testament to what their work looks like on a daily basis. Two more. Kelt's annual meeting is coming up April 5th at 5:30, and that's just a reminder that Mrs. Sawyer, Mrs. Harris, and students will be sharing their work, and that takes place at the New Maritime Museum. April 5th is also the Battle of the Books, and that is at 6:30 p.m. at the Bath Middle School. Our teams are coached by Mrs. Franklin and Ms. Schoolette, and we'll have 3 student teams and 1 teacher team competing. That's it.
Teacher team is practicing.
Oh, yeah. We've had snow days.
Oh. There's been some good out of them. Moving on to item 11.1.1, second reading of policy PBAB, school board self-evaluation.
There are no changes to that policy from the first reading.
I move we accept.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded, all in favor? It's unanimous. 12.1.2, policy BDD, board superintendent relationship.
Again, there have been no changes since the first reading.
I'll move we accept.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded, all in favor? Unanimous. 11.1.3, policy EBCE, school closings and cancellations.
Again, no changes.
All very familiar with this one this year.
I'll move we accept.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded, all in favor? It's unanimous. 11.1.4, policy KBF-E1, West Bath School Administrative Unit, Title I, Parent Involvement Policy, District level.
And let me lump that together with the school level. This was a policy that was broken out essentially because we hadn't done it yet, a single policy. So it was broken out last time, and there have been no changes to policies since the first reading.
As we take these in order, I'll move we accept KBF E1. Or do I do both at the same time?
However you phrase the motion.
And KBF E2.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve both policies with one vote. All in favor? Unanimous.
And the footnote.
Reminder that we struck item 11.2 from the agenda, moves us to, oh, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself, too excited. 11.1.6, second reading of policy KE, public concerns and complaints.
And this basically is resolution of disputes, complaints at the lowest possible level, and there are no changes made to that.
Move we accept.
Motion been made and seconded, all in favor? 11.3, school generator Red Cross shelter proposal.
So this has been an item that we've talked about as a board for several months, and then as a facilities committee as well. And so where we left things off at our last conversation was that I was to do some research around what schools had generators that would enable them to have full generation. And what we found out was that there are schools within Saginaw County that have partial generators, but there are no schools that have full generation. So schools with partial generators are Georgetown, Mount Ararat, and Bodenham. They have limited functionality. And that Brunswick superintendent had said that he had put 3 generators in their budget, but he wasn't sure they'd make it through the budget process. I also know that the South Bristol School has a generator that does have full capacity to have to run their school, but they had a power outage last week and didn't have school. So I'm not sure the details around that. But what we know from Saginaw County Emergency Management is that no schools in the county have full generation. I met with Adam Garland, our town administrator, to talk about what the school's role in the emergency plan was. And what he said was that the town has already purchased a generator for the firehouse and that they are moving forward with Red Cross certification, and their plan is that the fire station would be the town shelter. He did say that if we're interested, the school could serve as the county shelter. And we both had in our hands a grant, Maine Emergency Management Hazard Mitigation Grant, which potentially can fund generators for buildings that are critical facilities. But the only way for the school to be a critical facility would be if we were to be designated as a county shelter. So we made a couple of agreements in looking at how to proceed. And one was that, depending on what the board felt, we would go to a training together about how to move forward with this grant. Another would be that we would schedule a Red Cross activity to see of our facilities, are there any that really are close to being Red Cross certified, or would there be other expenses that would be attached to becoming certified? So the committee talked about, do we want to move forward with the Red Cross certification? And there was a general feeling that the building probably is not best suited in the county for being able to support the entire county by its location, by its size, by its layout. And then the other factor that the committee really struggled with is that if West Bath School became the county shelter, then even if West Bath had power, we would need to remain a shelter for the duration of wherever another community had an outage, and that meant that we wouldn't be able to have school. And so trying to solve one problem with moving towards a county shelter created a whole other dynamic that didn't seem like it made a whole lot of sense. And so the facilities committee did not favor having the school be a county shelter. We then discussed whether or not we would continue in looking at a full generator proposal. And some of the conversations we had were that in a series of sub-zero weather, it would take approximately 2 days for the building to get to a place where it was dangerously low, where we'd be looking at freezing temperatures, and that if we have that, I mean, if the pipes would be below freezing, and if we had that amount of time, then potentially we could be draining pipes, that there could be a plan that's put in place there. We also discussed how, while we had food losses, it was about $1,800 in losses, and when we compared that to $50,000 cost of a generator, one didn't seem to outweigh the other. Didn't feel like it was a responsible use of funds, given that the town did not feel that they had a need for the school to be the town shelter. And so the committee voted to not recommend the full generator project. As an aside, we did have a couple of items that are still being pursued that the committee asked that I find out about. And that is whether or not the building could be wired and pad poured so that in the event that there was an extended outage, like in October, that we could obtain an emergency generator from the state and wire the building. And that certainly can be done, but I haven't gotten the estimates back from Bath Electric for what that could look like. We also asked him to put together proposals for what it would look like to have a smaller generator that could alternately power our freezers and power the boilers, and that also, has the possibility of happening. But as an overall vote at this time, the committee is not making a recommendation to move forward with generator proposals.
I did list this on the agenda as an action item simply because we've devoted a substantial amount of time discussing it. Any board thoughts on the recommendation? Is this a project we want to continue to pursue or move away from it? Either of our facilities committee people want to
I
weigh in?
agree with the facilities committee.
I agree to not pursue the full generation, but I do think it would be worthwhile to look into the smaller projects that may not be as much of a budget impact, but could have a significant impact on mitigating damage as far as food losses or damage to water pipes.
Thoughts, Bob?
Well, that sounds reasonable, and there are, with a smaller generator, there's also the option of supplying limited heat or heat to limited zones, which should help. That you wouldn't have to basically de-power the entire building at that point. You could heat certain areas and keep the kitchen running if we had to. That sounds reasonable.
Anybody want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we follow the recommendation of the facilities committee to not pursue full generation, but that we do continue with researching the other less costly alternatives to supply us with the minimum generation needed in the event of an outage.
I'm not gonna repeat all
I
that.
second
That's the
that.
longest motion I've ever heard.
Covering my bases.
I will summarize it with, that we do not pursue full generation, and continue to explore alternatives. Fair summary?
Yes.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Brings us to item, item 12.1, approve labor contract. We do have a tentative agreement with the West Bath Education Association's ed techs and secretaries. Some of the highlights, if you will, we did reach agreement that while the old contract referred to a sick leave bank, and while the contract carried hours from RSU 1 to West Bath, the funds associated with that did not carry, and the association has agreed that that balance is now zero. So we were able to remove a fairly significant unfunded liability. We also made some changes to the grievance section, which reflected our unique setup where the principal and superintendent is one individual, and so we didn't feel the need to have two separate steps in that grievance process. We changed the sick leave cash out provision to increase from $100 to the per diem of the individual retiring after 20 years. And we did a salary adjustment, which was a 3% adjustment. There are 5 members of this association, very minimal budget impacts. I think the budget actually impact for the year was around 2.5, 2.75%. Looking for a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the contract.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? It is approved. Now the moment everybody's been waiting for. Item 12.2 was the first reading of the 2018-2019 school budget. I will remind everybody that this is also the first time the board has seen the budget. So we're going to let the superintendent do a full presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions from the board, and then we'll certainly entertain questions and discussions from the public. And I think we'll put the budget on the agenda every meeting so people come in. Nice to see that audience. The floor is yours.
Great. Welcome. There are challenges to preparing a budget at this time of year, particularly when we haven't settled a contract with teachers at this time. We don't have our Title I fund amounts available. Local entitlement funds have not been made available. So it means that preliminarily we need to increase those lines in our budget to cover those in the event that we don't get the funding we anticipate. So, as I just said, without having negotiations completed, our salary lines are estimated, which when salaries are the largest part of your budget, that becomes challenging, as are insurance rates, the best guess. We also have not heard about any retirement increases from the state, and so this budget keeps them flat. So our goal for the budget presentation is to share a draft budget. It's our goal to promote conversations, set priorities. And we'll go through each line item of the budget and discuss what the line means. We'll be looking at places where things increase and decrease. I'd ask that you think about district priorities and also the areas that are out of our control as we go through each line. I did put in your binder the board goals, just so that you had those at your fingertips. in the event that you would like to see them.
Thank you.
So in looking at your budget, I'm sure that the first page is the place that you want to start, but we're gonna come back to this at the end, and it asks that you move forward to the first page that looks like this, so beyond the overall amount. As the board knows, when we do budgeting, we have a zero-based budget process, and so we have all the backup for what budget costs are, or what's being proposed to the best that we can. All right, so looking at page 1, you see the first increase is salaries professional. This is an anticipated cost of what we might expect increases to be based on where we may end up settling in terms of negotiation process. That is an estimate. The next line looks at salary ed techs, and this is not an estimate because we have just voted to ratify the contract. And so we have one staff member who is a full-time regular educational technician, low user for a large part of her day for special education. However, the proposal that the contract that we just voted in does not have a 5.45% increase. I would like to talk about potentially changing a portion of the position. And so you'll see a proposal from 2 teachers and the ed tech in looking at a garden liaison. And what this position would be coordination that connects the various and diverse school garden stakeholders, looking at non-instructional times of this person's position at recess time and after school, to be able to have 1.5 hours per day be at an Ed Tech 3 level versus an Ed Tech 2 level. When I look at that change in the contract rates that we just voted in, making this change is a difference of $1,218.24 in the overall budget line for the position, but would allow us to continue to maintain our school vegetable gardens, to be able to do some direct instruction with students in exploratory groups, and then also at the recess times of processing, sewing, weaving, harvesting, to be able to work as a team member with classroom teachers, be able to be the liaison with kitchen staff so that we're able to really get that farm to school piece going that we've been working towards. And then, as I said, offer gardening opportunities during recess times for kids so that it's an option for gardening to happen during the recess blocks. So this budget does include the shift of a position of her time of 1.5 hours per day. In order for that to stay in the budget, it would be something that you would have to approve and we would change the position. Okay, moving down forward, the next increase that you see is health insurance professional. We've not settled a contract with teachers, so I don't know for sure what that rate will be. But using our current budget, which is that we fund 91% of prior year, the cost of the increase, you can see is an 8.75 increase. Looking at health insurance ed techs, because we do know that there is a decrease there based on what the employee selects. I'm not going to go through each of the little lines around Social Security and retirement and unemployment. You can see where those have increased or decreased. For the most part, they're flat. Adjustments come from just looking to see how we've tracked this year and making adjustments accordingly. So the next large increase you see halfway down the page is a 50% increase in staff development, moving from $2,000 to $3,000, and that's due to a large decrease that you're going to see when we get to looking at our EL contract. And so as we move closer to credentialing, and that allows us to look at funding some other staff development opportunities. The next increase is looking at tuition at the elementary level. And as you know, we have to plan for tuition rates for a number of students, and then in December we find out what that tuition rate actually is. So at this time of year, we're guessing what our tuition is, and then in December we adjust accordingly. And it goes anywhere between 3% and 7%. Last year we put in 4% as our increase, and we hit it exactly right. At the elementary level, we were low at the high school level, but we're saved by a fewer number of students. So we were able to come out ahead with that. So the way we have budgeted for tuition is that we look at our exact number of students and give 5 extra students in case it allows for some move-in. And then this is at 4% increase of what the current tuition is. Gives you an idea of where that figure comes from. Tuition elementary private, it's a 72.55% increase. And that is directly goes back to what I said about the number of students who have access to school choice. We do know this figure. These are the students who are electing to go to private school. And this is how much our allocation would be for their programming based on what we pay for RSU. Supplies are a decrease of 5.25%. Our supplies are done through zero-based budgeting. So this is looking at what has been requested and what is reasonably necessary for next year. Instructional equipment, on the other hand, is a 53.58% request. One of the things that I will just tell you ahead of time is that the facilities committee did not prioritize furniture, feeling that we have done a good job up to this point of replacing the furniture in classrooms that was necessary to be replaced. But there still are furniture requests in here. And so when you get to the place of discussing whether or not we want to stick with what's in the proposed budget versus where we might want to make some adjustments, there is about $8,000 worth of furniture for classrooms that has not been recommended by the facilities committee. On the other hand, there is about $4,500 of whiteboards, which the facilities committee does recommend be replaced, especially at this end. They're basically non-functioning whiteboards. And then the other item that's in here are copiers. And as you know, our copiers are an agreed upon cost that was derived from our withdrawal agreement. And it's been a hot topic because we pay for more than we actually get in terms of what our copiers are. We've also discovered that it's a little bit more of a hot topic than we knew because the first year of the agreement wasn't paid for until the second year. So our agreement actually comes to an end this year, but we still have another year of funding. So we're looking at paying for the copiers we currently have while we simultaneously need to fund our new copiers. The good news is that to fund our new copiers and printers is about half the cost of what we were already paying. And then this is broken out over 4 lines. So the way this then shakes out is in this line is $3,112.73 of old copier contract and $1,680 of new copier contract. So for this year, there's a double payment, and next year there would not be. So that's what makes up the instructional equipment line. Moving into pre-K, the only change that you'll see in the pre-K line is the professional educational services. There's an increase of 4%. That's at the request of our providers who haven't had a change in their funding in several years about how much that we pay per student. So that increases, I think, $230 per student. I have to go back and look, but it's a 4% increase. Still funds 12 students at 5 per days per week. Next is instruction secondary, and this is looking at tuition for public school students. And you can see that the first line is a decrease from current students. And this is the area where we have seen the biggest decrease in our student enrollment is at the high school level. At the public level, part of it is because students have elected school choice, but there are other families have moved, kids have gone to charter schools. There's just a variety of reasons. So that line, even though tuition significantly went up this year at the high school level, because our student count has dropped, looking at 60 students at 4% increase gives us a 6.77% decrease from the prior year. Tuition private is actual cost of school choice requests for next year. Do you want to do questions on each page, or do you want to go all the way through each? So the top of the next page talks to page 2. This is looking at special education. The first line is salaries professional. And then this is, again, an anticipated cost because we haven't settled a contract. It's also anticipated because the way we have our staffing here is I have a shared position with special education in Title I, and we haven't received our Title I allocation yet. So, while this doesn't cover, this covers 70% of that position, in the anticipation we'll get 30%, but that's something that as we get those allocations, we might have to talk about further. Then salary ed techs, there's no change in our staffing. It's a 5% increase. Looking at health insurance professionals, that's the 8.96 increase, that's based on our current contract. And same with health insurance educational technicians based on the contract that was just settled. You can see a 10.83% increase. Okay. Looking at, down at the bottom of special education, so it's 4 from the bottom of that line, tuition elementary public. You can see a 16.67% increase. We pay for our students who attend RSU1 the regular tuition, but then we also pay per student for anyone who has 60% of their programming in a specialized program for special education. And so this is to fund the students who receive those types of programs like behavior, life skills at the elementary level. And then likewise, the next line of 55.56% increases at the secondary level. And the next piece, tuition elementary private, that's looking at K-8 students who are expected to need out-of-district placement for next year. That's the actual cost based on our current enrollment. And the tuition secondary private is down to 0, because that's based on what our current enrollment looks like for next year. We only budgeted for exactly the students that we have, knowing that we transferred $60,000 of our funds from after our audit into a special education reserve account. So knowing that we have those funds meant that we could budget for exactly the students that we have in the district now, rather than having to build in an extra cushion for kids. Okay, the next section is looking at gifted and talented, and the only increases in gifted and talented are anticipated contractual increases, both with salary and insurance. And then there was a slight increase in supplies that was also offset with dues and fees, with a reduction of 33% there. Next is elementary co-curricular. And you can see there's a 555.56% increase, and that may be something that you wonder about. While the past practice has been that we prepay our boat building in Chewonki, I feel like that's not something that we can just do without having the board make that decision. And so as a place to hold that, it is in other expenses. Although probably it should be in regular instruction, because it's not really co-curricular, it's part of our regular instruction. I say prepaid, but it's not really prepaying, it's the calendar cycle we've been in paying for those programs. The next section is social work, page 3. We have a 4-day per week social worker. I could have a 10-day per week social worker and still not feel like we have enough. She is amazing at what she does and supports so many aspects of our students and families. The only increase in this line is anticipated contractual increases. So next is looking at school nursing. We have 1 day per week of school nursing. The increase is based on contractual expectations of, but it says 1.29, which is different than what you see in rates of other employees. That is because from the time this budget was adopted to where we are right now and what we're budgeting for next year, there was a change of staff. And so the position and step that the person came in was different. There's also been a decrease in the supplies that are necessary for next year. And as I said, because we do zero-based budgeting, we only budget for what our anticipated supplies are going to be. Okay, the next area is improvement of instruction. The first line looks at stipends, and those are stipends that are contractually obligated for curriculum work that happens after hours or in the summer, for certification committee, for mentors, for PEPG, which is our evaluation system, all those things that we're contractually obligated to have stipends for. I've not increased the number of those nor the rates, but I am proposing that we actually add a leadership team stipend, which would be 5 members at $250. It's a minimal amount, would increase the line by $1,250, But the reason is my leadership team does an amazing amount of work. And they give their time every week, every Tuesday to sit and go through our professional development plan and make suggestions on how to use all of our late start Wednesdays. Right now, they're working on credentialing, and it's all on their own time. And if we can at least acknowledge that we appreciate their work, I think that would be a good step in the direction well received. It wouldn't go anywhere near towards the amount of time that they put into helping this building be successful, but it is something to just acknowledge the work that they do. Looking at staff development, you'll see a decrease of 17.21%, and that is because we are getting closer to our credentialing status. And when we reach that, we still will have a small contract with the EL. This has a partial contract that would allow for, if we were to be credentialed, it also has spots in there for the credentialing team to go to the national conference to accept the credentialing status if we are awarded it. All right, looking at instructional staff training, there's no change from our current budget. These are contractually obligated tuition credits for continued education. All right, so the next section then is library. And we've had an interesting situation with the library this year where our librarian resigned a week before school started. And so we were unable to hire a librarian. And so around November, decided to continue with a long-term sub. But that's not legal for the long term. It worked for this year, getting us through this year. But this budget continues the practice of having a professional librarian for 3 days a week. And because we don't know who the person would be that we would hire, I put in 60% of insurance because they have the opportunity to elect to take insurance. Supplies have been decreased based on what we project that the supplies would be necessary. You'll see that other expenses have increased. And what that other expense is a card catalog system that's stayed steady. It's about $800 for our current catalog system. But there has been a request that we upgrade the chairs in this room so that they're more student friendly. So that's something that is currently in this budget. Okay, so next we are looking at our technology line, and you'll see that technology is broken out in a variety of different ways as we continue through the next several pages. So we first have, as I said, we haven't completed all of our negotiations for next year. So there's anticipated raises in here that may not be what we come up with. And health insurance increases that are based on current contract rates. Staff development has been decreased by 50% because of a decrease in what has been requested for staff development in that line. On the next page, contracted fees have decreased by 68.57%. So what this line pays for is part of our support for our student information system. We have to pay for professional development or help desk that we don't usually access but that we're required to have. But the reason it has dropped from $3,500 to $1,100 is because the rest of that cost was for our website contract, and our computer engineer is going to take all that information and redesign our website and host it ourselves, given that he has the expertise and background of being a web designer. So that change will happen after July 1. So we'll have our own hosted website here rather than contracting out with School Point. You'll see also a 100% decrease in computer leases because, as we talked about during the technology update, we are not in a computer lease year. So there's nothing that is being requested at this time. Okay. Supplies non-instructional has increased by 0.92%. What that is a student information system. And then there's been a request that we increase the capacity of our battery backup. Right now, our battery backup lasts for about 3 minutes if the power is to go out, and this would, as we have added more servers and systems into our building, all that used to be run remotely in our district, now it's all here. we need to increase our capacity for battery backup to get us to about 15 minutes.
Hopefully.
And then the supplies instructional, you'll also see that there is a decrease of 61.96% there. The requests in this line are that we upgrade our iPads. Right now we have 20 antiquated ones. We would like 5 because that's the number that we tend to use at a time. It also would include cases, some apps, and then 2 projectors to continue that projector cycle that we talked about. So that technology line is a very responsible decrease of 12.21. And I think again underscores that we ask for the things that we are needing at that time. Student assessment, this is a targeted fund. You are required to spend a certain percentage of funds for student assessment, and so we break out our technology position into those 2 categories. So that first one is a portion of the salary of that position. And then supplies non-instructional pays for our online formative testing with our NWEAs. The reason that's decreased is just the projected number of licenses we feel that we need to have next year. All right, next we're looking at Board of Education. And the first change is a decrease in contracted legal fees, moving from 20,000 to 8,000. And that is simply because we are not going to have renegotiating fee contracts next year like we are this year. I'm slightly concerned maybe I reduced it too much because in prior years we were very tight on that line, but that's something for the board to discuss whether or not we feel like it's the right amount. But that was where I started with. I also increased other expenses, which increased from 500 to 700, and that is just based on what we have been expending for board workshops and individual board trainings to go to workshops. So we had MSSA come in to do a whole board training, and we've also had members go to have other trainings that were specific for their committees that they were on. Other items, you can see an increase of $11,000, and I put this here because I wasn't really sure where it should go. But in our contracts, we have retirement funds that we need to pay for teachers when they choose to retire. And currently, if we had a teacher that was to retire next year, or this year, I don't have a way to pay for that. And so this would allow for one teacher to choose to retire and for us to meet our contractual obligations around that retirement. It seemed like an appropriate place to put it. It was other, but perhaps we'll make a different choice. The reduction is 1.81%. Office of the Superintendent. There are anticipated increases here, but there have been no negotiations around contracts and salaries, and so those remain to be seen what they will be, if any. Staff development has decreased because they're just based on what we've been accessing. Rents, leases, that is again the copiers. So that is the way that we fund our copiers is 50% of the copiers are instructional, non-instructional equipment in the teacher's line, and then 25% is in school administration, 25% is in system administration. And so this is increased because it's the old contract and then 25% of the new contract. The other area that is increased is postage. And I just can't seem to get this one right, to be honest with you. I don't think it's because postage has gone up. I just think that I didn't anticipate the cost of mailing out all of the advance written notice for special education and how much it costs. So this has been increased to try to get a little closer to getting it right. Mary's smiling at me. That was her last job here.
My job.
Writing advance written notices and mailing them out. All right. So next is Office of Superintendent, and like I just talked about in regard to principal, school administration, there hasn't been any conversations around rates and benefits for next year, and so those may not be as they are in the budget. It was just a placeholder. Oh, excuse me, this is special education administration. So, but the same thing, we haven't finished those negotiations. One thing that's different in here in regards to health insurance administrators for special education, I'm looking at now the top of page 6, is that the position is eligible for 50% of benefits. And so that has been added into the budget in the event that the person who is in that position elects to take 50% of benefits. And it's been added in because the person in that position has indicated that she elects to take 50% of benefits. So it's trying to be mindful of our contractual obligations there. We've decreased special ed contracted services by 7.41% and also other expenses by 10.63%, based on where we're tracking right now for contracted services. Other expenses pays funds for our ESY and also our main care seed funds. And based on our anticipated programs for the students who get main care seed funds, that is what I anticipate. This is a slight decrease in what we have currently. Okay, so now we're looking at school administration, which is the second half of page 6, and they've already covered the salaries and benefits and the unknowns around that. Rent leases, which is a 53.97% increase, that's the last 25% of the copier contracts. And there are no other changes here. Central services, other expenses that have increased 5.73%. That is our financial software and our hosting of that financial software, allowing us to manage our finances. That's an increase that they have provided for us that they are expecting it to be. Okay. So next we are looking at facilities operation and maintenance. Utility service is Bath Water District. Cleaning services is our cleaning company, and slight building maintenance. Our bid that we had received as we enter our second year is that there's no increase. Repairs, maintenance, this is where all those items that the facilities committee presented on are all currently in here on top of the regular portion of just keeping our building running and having our annual inspections and semi-annual inspections and quarterly inspections. Insurance remains the same. Supplies have decreased slightly. Electricity is tracking exactly right. Heating oil, we do not currently have a bid for. So, that I'm aware of, Adam. Currently still no, yeah. So I kept it where it is. We're meeting that, but that's something that we'll have to revisit potentially as through this process. Student transportation, we have a bid that remains the same for next year from our transportation system. Other expenses increases slightly. This is homeless transportation. It's some of it in the ESY transportation, so our summer program transportation. I've also increased our co-curricular and field trip transportation slightly because it's a place that we use a lot of. And this is a place that our PTO actually funds a significant amount for us. But I thought we had to do our due diligence and increase slightly. Next is looking at student transportation out of district. This is special education transportation to students who need it on their IEPs. Who attend programs in RSU1, but also who are out of district for other placements, special education. And so it is a decrease because we have fewer students who will be accessing that service next year according to current IEPs. That is 40% decrease. And then finally, food service seems to be tracking exactly right. So I propose that we keep the local contribution to food service at $35,000. And so now if you go back to the front page, you can now look at each of the warrant article lines for the last few years, and you can see the increases and decreases in each of those lines. The bottom line is that the total proposed budget is an increase of 5.38%. Of $3,182,307.59. The state subsidy is increased by 32.59%. We were receiving $165,886.42. Tuition credit decreases slightly at 10.56%. This tuition credit comes from our RSU1 students who are still here. We get an offset to the tuition for them. Anticipated carryover of $285,000 We have a whopping carryover from undesignated funds from last year of $3,445.30, which brings local contribution to $3,326,22.97, or a current increase of 7.34%. And again, if you go back to how I started, the first budget, the first reading, gives us an opportunity to have a place to start from as we have our conversations around our goals and think about the pieces that we have no wiggle room with and where we do have some opportunity to make some choices.
Preliminary board comments, questions, feedback before we go to public.
Well, let me say that one of the proposals is putting the $35,000 into a fund, basically, to fund ultimately the roof, which gets replaced, 6, 7, and 8 years out. And I know the township has a financial fund, basically, that could finance the different aspects to be paid kind of on an ongoing basis. And it's really almost for the township to wade in and see if they think it's reasonable to start putting $35,000 a year, and so that we don't have to, I mean, that would almost cover the first year's, or the roof one, I guess, project, 6 years from now. So it's just really a philosophy for the town.
Don't disagree. The only caution, I guess, I would throw is if we put all our eggs in one basket and the proposal gets voted down, we still need to replace the roof. Or if something else comes up and the funds aren't there 6 years from now, we still gotta replace the roof. Keep the board to decide, but, risk reward. What's the right thing to do in year one?
It seems like it's the right thing to do unless the town has a preference to approach it in a different way. But to be proactive, which is our responsibility, I guess, without any other guidance, it, as you said, seems prudent.
Other board thoughts? Do we know what it would cost us to break the copier contract? Is it cheaper to break the contract than to pay two?
We can't, it's a contract with RSU one, as part of our withdrawal agreement. It's not actually a contract with the copier
Yeah.
themselves.
Go ahead.
Replacements cost half of what we're paying.
With tuition, you budgeted 4% and how many headcount increase?
5. We've done 3 in the past. My hesitancy is, it was only, that I've gotten a lot of calls that, we're moving to West Bath, and just wanted to be prepared if that was really the case. But 3 has seemed to be sufficient.
What was that? And then 6 for secondary? Is there a headcount increase for
I
secondary?
do, yeah. Yes, 5 and 6.
Last year for secondary?
You would pay for both.
Mhm. Who wants to go first? I'll open it up to the public.
How is the roof right now?
The roof is in great shape right now. I have a very good relationship with our roofer. I feel very confident in our annual inspections in the conversations we've had. I also had a private inspection done, and the private inspector also agreed that our roof was in really good shape. Instead, when we did the rejuvenation of the roof, that was to buy us, a little more time before the replacement, but our warranty will be up.
So it's a good, confident feeling that 6 years is doable?
I do feel confident, yep. And we have a relationship with our roofer, and we pay for the annual inspection, and that, we had a leak there earlier in the year, and they came right in and took care of it. And we have all the evidence that shows how that was repaired.
As far as funding it, it'd probably be worthwhile to figure out the numbers of what will be in that fund in 6 years. Because we gotta buy a fire truck at some point, and the salt shed should be on this, getting down payments, almost done at that point, and that's adding back into the fund, so we should just get together and figure out where the fund stands and then decide about that $35,000.
I think part of my concern in not putting it in the budget is that I want to have a plan so we're not hit with it in 6 years, and
Well, the town's gonna vote for it either way, yes or no, so it makes a difference.
I think it makes a difference though if I know that the board has talked about it all along the way.
Right, no, but I mean, as far as the town funding it,
Right.
if we can afford to fund it reasonably out of that fund, that's what it's there for. And rather than to raise money twice and have it sitting there, I'd rather check that out and see if we can use that fund for this ongoing roof project 6 years from now.
And there's no history of the town of West Bath really that says that the town wouldn't be appropriate and responsible about funding a school if people like the school.
I don't disagree,
Yep, so,
but we
At
have
some
an
point-
obligation to raise the issue as well.
no, I agree, at some point, we'll sit down with Adam and figure out the pros and cons, money going out, money coming in. Right now, I think, probably than, at the most, 3 years, we'll be ordering a fire truck. And I think probably a year to get it, because that'll be 25 years old. But in the meantime, we'll be, paid down that salt shed loan quite a bit by then. So we'll see how that plays out. We'll check it out further. Just, matter of fact, what's the incoming class look like kindergarten this year? Preliminary, I realize you can't hold to it, but
I expect that we'll have one class at the top of the class size limit, which is between 14 and 16. But I'm anticipating one class, and we're exiting out 1 5th grade.
okay, so 1 for 1. And didn't hear it mentioned exactly, but are we getting the new computers, the tablets, Chromebooks, was it?
Nope, we are in a cycle where we are not in a Chromebook cycle this year.
Okay.
So there was the line of, in the technology,
That was the drop, was no Chromebooks.
yeah, it's 0. We don't have any contracts we're entering in. Instead, we are requesting that we purchase 5 new iPads. We have 20 antiquated ones right now, and we don't need 20 because we don't do one-to-one with iPads, but we use them in centers. And so that would be the purchase that we would be requesting for this year.
And you have a make and model you're looking at?
The price has gone down, just a matter of fact, the iPads are a lot cheaper now too, so it's a good purchase.
And we've had good luck with the Chromebooks, right?
Fantastic. And then the other piece to just know is that we're anticipating when we get back into the cycle of purchasing that the Chromebooks that are currently in classrooms would then replace the computers that are in the student carts, so that we wouldn't be getting into a place where all of a sudden we're looking to purchase 25 MacBooks. We're really happy with the Chromebooks and see that we would be moving forward with those as the device that we use.
And how is EL accreditation going?
So well. I said during my district update that we had to submit March 1st our outline for our portfolio, and it's a 7-page document of what we say that our portfolio is going to prove, and we've been approved just on Friday to move forward with that last round of going through that process.
And along the same line, I don't know if you care to give the people here a brief rundown of your meeting with Brunswick and what the thoughts were and how we could work together on different aspects.
Do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. We spent hour and a half, I guess, with a few members of their board, superintendent, assistant superintendent, really just brainstorming. There are some interesting ideas on the table. There are some things that frankly I don't think would benefit the town of West Bath as much as our neighbors would benefit from it. Obviously, we're not gonna pursue those types of things. If we can come up with, some cost sharing, transportation. One of the things that was discussed was sharing a grant writer position between a couple of different districts, which should more than pay for itself. I think that's worth continuing to explore. Nothing firm enough yet to really say this is the direction we're going to go. We're obviously interested in collaborating and partnering with our neighbors, but it needs to be at the taxpayers' best interest and our students' best interest. We're not going to subsidize another school district like perhaps we have in the past.
Any questions? It's all preliminary here, but
Peter?
A quick question, I don't know if you guys have the information off the top of your head. Do you have a breakdown of how many students are here, how many go to RSU?
I do. So anticipated for next year would be 131 here in our building and 89 in RSU1 schools and 20 in other schools. And that doesn't, those would be the ones that would be publicly funded.
Okay.
So
Thank
it's
you.
239 students.
Yep, thank you.
have the other schools been increasing number-wise?
Yes. Yeah, we're
I thought it
at
was.
just under 20% of students applying for school choice right now. We just designated all those funds and slots.
Are we in danger of hitting that threshold that we guaranteed RSU wanted?
We are not in danger for this year because it's at 20%, but it's certainly
Right.
5%
increasing.
away.
Yep.
Okay,
And none of the students actually who are school choice students are seniors this year, so next year it'll be tight for people who are applying.
okay.
And board policy says if we hit that threshold, we go to a lottery, so we won't exceed that threshold.
That's right, that's right. Geez, I'd hate to do this. We'll see,
It's interesting though, isn't it?
we'll see. Pay rep.
Yeah.
Other public comments, questions?
Just on the generator, we haven't certainly talked about it personally. I think it's a good idea to go with the other options, at least exploring the other options, to protect the food or the water system or whatever, keeps the heat in the building without going the full-blown route. It'd probably be very expensive if Red Cross came in and said you had to do this, this, and this, and this to be certified.
Well, a big part
Plus
of
being a
the,
countywide shelter is not ideal,
Not being able to operate as a school.
no.
and a big part of the facilities committee recommendation to not move forward was the conversation with the town administrator that the town has a plan, and that's with the fire station. And if the plan was that the town needed the school, then by all means, the conversation would be different, but that's not currently
Well,
what
I'd
the
also
town
like to
feels.
think if something happened in town, needed to use the school, it still is a town building,
Absolutely.
so we could still,
Have a long history of sharing.
that's right.
And with the county, it seems like there are better options in the county than West Bath School was one of the big things.
RSU one, I
It's
think.
there if we need it.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public
No, I'll wait, I'm sorry.
Close public comment and come back to the board. Had a few minutes to digest. Thoughts, ideas? What's the board's thought on boat building in Chewonki? Traditionally, we have paid for it in the current year's budget, not next year's budget.
Well, I don't know of another project that we've had that has generated such a positive buzz, if you want, both in the community and in the school. And it's certainly an educational experience for the students. So yeah, it's one of those things that has almost universal raves.
Acting in the best interest of the students, I think it's important that we fund those programs.
It doesn't make a difference to me what year we fund them, as long as they are funded.
Since we're on item 12.2.1, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we take the funding for the boat building program and Chewonki out of the proposed budget and pay with it current year, because we haven't done the last 3 years. Last 2 years, this will be the third.
I will second that motion.
Discussion? All in favor? Any other board thoughts on the first reading? Obviously, we have many more readings to hash through. Any final public comment on the first reading?
Thank you for all the work. Put into it.
Brings us to item 13, public comment.
Can you go through the budget one more time?
Yes, you can stay after school. We'll go to
The attention again.
14.1, next meeting will be Monday, March, no, that's tonight? Never mind. Will be Wednesday, March 28th at 6:30. It will be a budget workshop, but I do, just for the board's notification, I do anticipate needing to have a regular meeting either before or after workshop, so we plan on that, and we'll update as soon as we confirm that. And then April 4th at 6:30, it will be the regular monthly meeting of the West Bath School Board, assuming it doesn't snow and get canceled. And at this point, I'll make a motion to go into executive session pursuant to Title I, Chapter 13, Section 4056B of the MRSA for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations between the West Bath SAU and the West Bath. Motion's been made and seconded, all in favor? We are in executive session.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back into regular session. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I will motion
I
to
will
adjourn.
second.
Motion's been made and seconded, all in favor? That is unanimous.